It was supposed to be just another night. The kind of night that blends into the monotony of late hours. I work at a small, old movie theater in the middle of nowhere, the kind that hasn't seen a renovation in decades. My name's Michael, and I manage the place, well, more like I run it alone when the clock strikes midnight. Most of the staff leave after the last showing, and I'm left behind to clean up and lock up. That night, the place felt different. There was something off in the air, like an unsettling chill that crawled into the room unnoticed. But it wasn't until the last movie ended, the lights went up, and the credits rolled that I first noticed it. The theater was almost empty. Just a few stragglers in the back, chatting and making their way toward the exit. Nothing unusual. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, and I was preparing to close up for the night. I walked down the long, dimly lit hallway to the projection room to turn off the lights and lock the door. That's when I heard it. A soft sound. A faint rustling, like someone shuffling through the seats. It didn't seem like a person at first, more like a sound you hear when you're half asleep, when your mind is playing tricks on you. But I stopped in my tracks. The rest of the theater was empty. I hadn't heard anyone leave. I turned slowly, my heart thumping in my chest. There, near the back row, a figure sat alone. A man, maybe in his mid-30s. But what struck me wasn't just that he was there, but the way he sat, perfectly still, his head bent forward slightly as if in a trance. I could see his silhouette, but his face remained hidden in the shadows. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. "Hey, we're closed," I said, my voice a bit too loud in the silence. Nothing. He didn't even twitch. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk over and ask if he needed help, maybe an extra ticket or a ride home. But something stopped me. A gut feeling. It was like my instincts were screaming at me to leave. I took a deep breath, and before I could make my next move, I saw something that froze me in place. The man's head slowly lifted, but his eyes were wide open, unblinking, and completely black. Not a hint of white or color. Just endless voids. It was as if something was staring back at me from the other side of those empty eyes. A sharp, electric chill shot up my spine, and I couldn't move. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, without warning, the man stood up. He didn't move normally, his movements were jerky, as though his body was being manipulated by some unseen force. And that was when I heard it, the softest whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Leave." The voice wasn't his. It was guttural, distorted. Something in the air seemed to shift, the room suddenly feeling colder, heavier. I took a step back, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? Some kind of sick joke? But then the figure started walking toward me, slowly, deliberately. The more I backed away, the closer he got. And with each step, I felt the air around me growing denser, colder. I knew something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The man, or whatever he was, wasn't human. I could feel it. That's when the lights flickered. And then they went out. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I was frozen in place, the only sound in the theater was my own panicked breathing. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen wouldn't light up. It was as if all the power in the building had been sucked into something I couldn't see. And then I heard it again. "Leave, now." The voice was closer this time, so close that I could feel the warmth of its breath on my ear. I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just bolted for the exit, my heart pounding in my chest, the echo of my footsteps on the empty floors deafening in the stillness. The door slammed behind me as I stumbled into the cold night air. I don't know what happened in that theater that night. All I know is that I was lucky to make it out. I never went back after that. And I'd advise anyone who works late in a place like that, don't. Some things are better left in the dark. I couldn't sleep for days after what happened. The images of that man, the empty black eyes, and the voice that wasn't his haunted my every waking moment. But what was worse than the fear, what gnawed at me, was the sense of unfinished business. Like I had left something behind, something that needed to be uncovered, something that couldn't be ignored. So, against my better judgment, I decided to go back. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. Not that anyone would believe me anyway. People at the theater thought I was just a kid, doing a late-night shift and getting a little too spooked by the dark corners of the building. But I knew something was wrong. There was a story behind what I saw, a reason for what happened. And I was going to find out. The next evening, after hours, I snuck back in. The staff had all gone home, and the place was quiet, almost too quiet. I still felt that chill in the air, like something was watching me, but I pushed it aside. I needed answers. I went straight to the projection room. It was the last place I had seen him, and I was hoping there might be something on the footage. Maybe the cameras caught something I missed. As I climbed the stairs to the projection booth, I noticed how the building felt even older than I remembered. The walls creaked with every step, and the fluorescent lights above flickered like they were about to give out. When I reached the projection room, I checked the security footage. The screen was grainy and distorted, but it was enough to give me a start. The footage from that night was strange. The man was there, sitting in the same seat, just like I remembered. But then, as the movie ended, something happened. The lights didn't just flicker, they blinked out completely. And for a brief second, the camera caught a shadow moving across the floor. It wasn't a person. It was too large, too fluid, like it was crawling across the ground, almost as if the shadow itself was alive. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, something even stranger happened. The figure, the man with the black eyes, stood up and walked toward the exit. But the way he moved, it wasn't human. His steps were disjointed, unnatural, like a puppet on strings, and then he vanished. The screen blinked, and suddenly the footage turned to static. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not now. Not after seeing that. But before I could leave, I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible whisper. Like it was coming from the walls themselves. You shouldn't have come back. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Then the temperature dropped. I felt the cold again, creeping up my spine, crawling beneath my skin. My breath fogged up in the air, and the sound of whispers grew louder, surrounding me. The voice was no longer just one. There were dozens, hundreds of them, each one hissing, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. I backed away from the screen, my heart pounding. There were no windows in the projection room, and the door was behind me. I could feel the presence of something that wasn't human, closing in. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and then I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing in the shadows at the far side of the room. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their eyes black voids just like the man's, staring at me, unblinking. They were silent now, but I could feel their eyes on me, judging me. It felt like they were waiting for something. That's when I heard the voice again, the same distorted whisper from before, only this time, it was closer. Leave, or join us. I didn't know what the hell that meant, but I knew I couldn't stay to find out. I bolted for the door, slamming into it with all my force. It wouldn't budge. I shoved again, panic rising in my chest, the whispers intensifying around me, clawing at my sanity. Then, just as I thought I was going to suffocate in that suffocating darkness, the door opened. I didn't hesitate. I didn't care who or what had opened it. I ran out, down the hallway, through the lobby, and into the cold, empty night. I didn't look back. I couldn't. And as I made my way down the street, shaking, trying to catch my breath, I knew I had uncovered something that shouldn't be uncovered. The movie theater wasn't just a building. It was something else. Something ancient, something that had been waiting for someone like me to come along. But there was one thing I didn't understand: why me? Why had I been chosen to witness all this? And what happened to the others? What happened to the ones who didn't leave? I don't know if I'll ever get the answers, but I don't think I want to. Some things are better left unknown. I thought that after I left the theater, I would be free of whatever had been lurking inside. But the nightmares came. They weren't like the usual bad dreams that fade when you wake up. These were different. Vivid, intense. I could hear those whispers in my sleep, feel the cold on my skin, the eyes watching me from the shadows. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black, empty voids staring back at me. But the worst part? I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it followed me. It was as if I had been marked. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. Who would believe me? Who would believe that a place as innocuous as a movie theater could hold something so otherworldly? So evil? It started with small things. Objects in my apartment would be out of place when I woke up. A chair moved an inch to the left, the kitchen light flickering in the dead of night. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but it escalated. I could hear the faint whispers, like they were coming from the walls of my own home. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my body covered in cold sweat, hearing them, those same voices, growing louder, demanding that I go back. It was always the same phrase. Come back to us. I tried to ignore it. I tried to go on with my life. But the whispers wouldn't stop. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't sleep. I started to look into the history of the theater, searching for answers, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what had happened to me. What I found wasn't comforting. The theater had been built over a century ago. At first, it was a thriving place, packed with people every night, but that all changed during the Great Depression. The theater became a gathering place for people who couldn't afford the luxuries of life, a place where they could escape, even if for just a couple of hours. But then, strange things began happening. Disappearances. People claimed to hear voices in the theater at night, whispers that would drive them mad. It got so bad that, in the late 1930s, the theater was shut down for good. But it didn't stay empty for long. In the 1950s, it reopened under new ownership. The rumors of strange happenings never stopped, but the new owners ignored them, chalking it up to superstition. And for a while, business went on as usual. Until one night, a fire broke out in the building. No one knew how it started, but the flames tore through the place, leaving only charred remains. But even then, the rumors didn't die. People said that the spirits of those who had disappeared still lingered in the theater, angry, restless, waiting for something or someone. And that's when I understood. The theater wasn't just a place where movies were shown. It was a prison, a place where things were trapped. Souls. Entities. Whatever they were waiting for someone to open the door. To let them in. I had walked right into it. I had opened the door. That's when the messages started. First, they were in my dreams, but soon, they were on my phone. Texts from unknown numbers, cryptic messages, all urging me to return to the theater. Come back. We are waiting. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. I had to face it, face whatever was hunting me. I drove back to the theater. The building looked abandoned from the outside. No lights. No sounds. But I could feel it. That presence. The whispers were back, louder than ever. As soon as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped again. It was as if the building itself was alive, watching me, waiting. I walked down the hallway toward the projection room. My footsteps echoed, each one louder than the last. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in on me. And when I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. But I knew I had to go in. There was no turning back now. I pushed the door open. The room was just as I remembered it, the dark shadows, the flickering lights, the feeling of being suffocated by the darkness. But this time, it was different. The whispers weren't just around me anymore, they were inside my head, inside my soul, clawing at me, demanding that I listen. Join us. I could feel the presence of those figures, the twisted, deformed shapes in the corners of the room, but this time, I wasn't frozen. I had to confront it, whatever it was. I wasn't going to run again. Then, from the far corner of the room, I saw it. A figure, sitting in the same seat as before. It was the man, the one with the black eyes. But he wasn't the only one. There were others, dozens of them, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes nothing but black voids, staring directly at me. I tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The air was thick with something dark, something ancient. And then, the man spoke. His voice was not just a whisper. It was in my mind, vibrating through my bones. You should have never left. I tried to turn, to run, but I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, trapped in place, as if something was holding me there, binding me to the spot. The shadows around me closed in, the whispers growing louder, the figures shifting, reaching out. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just a nightmare. This wasn't just some ghost story. I had become part of it. I don't know how much time passed after I stood there, trapped in that cold, suffocating room. My mind was racing, my body locked in place as if every nerve in my body had been paralyzed. The figures around me, those twisted, dark shapes, shifted in the shadows, their eyes boring into me. The whispers, once distant, now seemed to fill the very air I breathed. Their words were no longer just a murmur. They were a command. Join us. The man with the black eyes was standing now, moving toward me with unnatural grace. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though he were savoring every moment. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. I was frozen in place. You think you can escape? He asked, his voice a rasping hiss that echoed in my skull. You opened the door. You let us in. You can never leave. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but it was as though my very soul was being pulled toward him, dragged into the darkness that surrounded us. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I felt a pressure building inside my chest, as though the room itself were closing in on me. Please, I whispered, but the word barely left my lips before the figure was inches from me. His black eyes stared down at me, and I felt a chill that cut to my core, deeper than anything I'd ever known. You have a choice, he said, his voice now dripping with malice. Stay here, in the dark, with us. Or, he paused, and in that moment, I felt the shadows around me grow more intense, like they were alive, pulling me toward them. Or what? I croaked, my voice barely audible, struggling to make sense of what was happening. Or, you can join them, he said, his grin widening. We can give you power. Strength. Immortality. All you have to do is let go. Let the darkness take you. I shook my head, tears pricking at the edges of my eyes. I won't. I won't let you do this. But as I said those words, the shadows around me seemed to pulse with energy. The figures were closing in, their bodies distorting in ways that should have been impossible. Their faces twisted, grotesque masks of pain and hunger. The whispers were deafening now, 1,000 voices all urging me to give in. Join us, they hissed in unison. You belong with us. I could feel myself slipping. The weight of their presence was overwhelming. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs still wouldn't move. The darkness around me felt like a thick fog, wrapping itself around my thoughts, smothering my will. And then, I heard it. A sound that wasn't part of the whispers. A voice. A familiar voice. Michael. It was a woman's voice. Soft, but steady. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. It was my mother's voice. I hadn't heard it in years. She had passed away when I was a kid, but hearing her now, it brought me back. It grounded me. "Michael, listen to me," she said again, her voice more urgent this time. "You have to fight. They can't have you. You're stronger than this." I felt a spark of something deep inside me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was the will to survive. To break free. The man with the black eyes laughed as I struggled against the grip of the shadows. "You can't escape. You'll never escape." But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I could feel the warmth of my mother's voice, guiding me, pulling me back from the edge. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength I had left, and then, finally, I broke free. I bolted forward, ignoring the pain in my limbs, ignoring the cold that threatened to swallow me whole. I didn't care about the whispers or the figures closing in. I had to get out. With one final, desperate push, I ran for the door. The moment I touched the handle, the whispers turned to screams. The figures were right behind me, their hands reaching out to drag me back into the darkness. But I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I tore open the door and ran out into the night. As I sprinted down the empty street, gasping for breath, I knew one thing for certain: I had barely escaped. But that's the thing about places like that movie theater. They don't let go easily. And I don't know if I'll ever truly escape. Every night, when I close my eyes, I still hear the whispers. I still feel them reaching for me. The theater is still there, waiting. And one day, I know I'll be back. Maybe it's not over. Maybe it never will be. But for now, I survive. I thought leaving that night would be the end of it. I thought I had escaped whatever had been haunting me, that somehow, by outrunning the shadows and the whispers, I had sealed my fate. But the truth was far worse. It wasn't over. It would never be over. The whispers followed me everywhere. They became a constant hum in the back of my mind, a soft murmur that never quite stopped. I tried to ignore it. I tried to live my life. I moved to a different city. I got a new job. I even started dating again, though every night, when I closed my eyes, the darkness was still there, waiting. But I knew the day would come when I couldn't outrun it any longer. I was right. It started with the dreams. They weren't like the nightmares I had before. These were worse. They felt more real. In the dreams, I was back in the theater, standing in front of the projection room door, watching the shadows dance on the walls. And every time I tried to turn away, something held me there, forcing me to watch. The man with the black eyes would appear again, standing in front of me, whispering that same, cursed phrase. "Join us." Each night, the dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, certain that the darkness was about to consume me. But every time I thought it was over, it came back, like a haunting melody I couldn't shake. I couldn't escape. That's when I realized, it was calling me. The theater was calling me back, as if it had never let go, as if it was always waiting for me to return. So, I did. I drove back to that old theater one last time. The building stood there, just as I remembered it, silent, abandoned, and yet, alive. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, the shadows stretching in ways they shouldn't. I stood in front of the door for a long time, staring at it, as if trying to gather the courage to turn the handle. But I already knew what was waiting inside. I had always known. I pushed the door open, and the cold rushed at me like an old friend, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. The whispers were louder now, clearer, as if the building itself was breathing with me, waiting for my next move. I didn't hesitate. I walked inside, past the empty lobby, past the closed doors, toward the projection room. The moment I entered, the door slammed shut behind me. I didn't even flinch. I had already accepted it. This was it. The final confrontation. I walked to the center of the room, looking around. The shadows were thick and oppressive, curling into corners where the light couldn't reach. And there, standing in front of me once again, was the man with the black eyes. His face was a mask of emptiness, an abyss staring back at me. "Welcome back," he said, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "Did you think you could run forever?" I didn't answer. What was there to say? I had come back. I had always known I would. "You have a choice," he continued, his grin widening. "Stay here. Join us. Or leave, and never return." I took a deep breath, my pulse racing in my ears. I was beyond fear now. It wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about facing the truth. And I knew what I had to do. "I'm done running," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "I'll face whatever you are. But you're not going to control me." The figure tilted his head, almost curiously, as if considering my words. The shadows around him seemed to shift, like they were alive, waiting for the signal to engulf me. "You think you can fight this?" he asked, his voice now low and menacing. "There's no escape. There's no winning. This place, this theater, it feeds on souls. On fear. And you will feed it, just like all the others." I looked around, the room now alive with movement. The figures, the twisted, shadowy shapes that I had seen in my nightmares, were emerging from the corners, their eyes all black, their faces contorted in agony. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were real. They were here. But this time, I didn't back down. I raised my hand, holding up a small object I had taken from the outside world, the one thing that had kept me going through all of this, a lighter. I had found it in my pocket, forgotten until now. It was small, ordinary, but in my hand, it felt like a weapon. I flicked the lighter, the flame dancing in the dark, casting flickering light against the shadows. The figures shrieked in unison, recoiling from the light like vampires from the sun. I could see their true form now, twisted, skeletal, with hollow eyes that wept black tears. And then, I did it. I set fire to the shadows. Not just with the lighter, but with the fire inside me, the determination to survive, to fight, to end this nightmare once and for all. The flames grew, spreading across the walls, licking at the darkness until the room was filled with light. The figures screamed, their voices distorting in agony as the fire consumed them. But it wasn't just the shadows I was burning. I was burning the theater itself, the very place that had held these things captive for so long. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. The room was silent. The air was still. The darkness had been driven back, and the whispers had stopped. For the first time in what felt like years, I was free. I turned and walked toward the exit, the door swinging open with ease. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had fought my way out. And this time, I wasn't going back. When I finally walked out of that theater for the last time, I thought the nightmare was over. I thought I had faced the darkness, burned it away, and emerged on the other side free. The air outside felt different, fresh, clean, and alive, like I had been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the pavement, but I didn't feel the pull of them. I didn't feel the weight of the dark presence anymore. For a while, everything seemed normal. I went back to my life. I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I even began to forget the theater, the figures, the black eyes. It was as if they were just a bad dream, a terrifying chapter one could finally close. But then, one night, just a few weeks later, it came back. It started with a phone call. An unknown number. I should have ignored it, but for some reason, I picked up. Maybe I thought it was someone trying to sell me something, or a wrong number. But no. Michael, the voice on the other end whispered, cold and familiar. It was the voice of the man with the black eyes. I froze. You thought you escaped, he continued, his voice full of malice. But the theater, it's never truly gone. It's always waiting. And so are we. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. That voice. That horrible, guttural whisper. I knew it wasn't just a prank. I knew it wasn't over. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somehow, in some twisted way, I was still connected to that place. The theater. The shadows. The voices. And then it hit me. The theater had never been just a building. It wasn't just a place where people gathered to watch movies. It was something else, something ancient, something that fed on fear and darkness. It wasn't the physical theater that had haunted me. It was what it had become. A doorway. A trap. A gateway to something far worse than anything I could have imagined. It was still out there, waiting. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew deep down that I would never be free of it. It had left its mark on me. And as I looked into the night, with the flickering lights casting long shadows on the ground, I understood the truth. The theater wasn't just a place. It was a curse. And once you walked through its doors, it owned you forever. I don't know if this story will make you believe me. Maybe you'll think I'm crazy, that I imagined it all. Maybe you'll dismiss it as a nightmare, or a ghost story. But I swear on my soul, what happened to me in that theater was real. I don't know how or why it happened. All I know is that it's not just about the place, it's about the things waiting inside it, the things that have been trapped there for far too long. And if you ever find yourself near that old movie theater, the one on the corner of Ashford Avenue, be careful. Because it's still there. Waiting. And the whispers. They never stop. If you ever hear them calling your name, don't answer. Just walk away. Or you might end up like me, caught between the world of the living and whatever it is that lies behind the theater's walls.